A very warm welcome to this episode of EndoSocial, a series where we focus on non-medical research in endometriosis. My name is Alekszandra Rokvity, and I am joined today by Alicja Pawluczuk. I hope that I pronounced your last name at least remotely correctly.
It's great. It's great. Very impressive.
As myself, a Slavic person, I'm also used to people never saying my name correctly. That's kind of our burden in life, right?
Yeah.
But Alicia is many things, a very impressive person, if I may say so, a brilliant artist, a brilliant researcher. She's currently working as part of the Include Plus network, and she developed the concept of endoviolence, which is something that we'll talk about a lot today as well, mainly because I personally find it incredibly interesting and useful. But what I like to do in this series and in general, I'm not a very big fan of reading out somebody's biography from a website. I think that's kind of boring. I like to give the person the opportunity to say something about themselves. So, Alicia, for people who don't know you, how would you introduce yourself? What are some things that you think people should know about you and about who you are and what you do?
Thank you so much for having me on your incredible podcast, and thank you for doing. It's not a podcast, right? It's a webinar. It's a series. It's yeah. So thanks again, and it's. Do you know what? To be honest, I don't even remember remotely what actually is on my website at the moment, and then it's thinking about which website are we talking about because I feel like managing in between so many websites and identities, and I think it sort of encompasses who I am as a person uh, with my research and my art. And my research for many years has been around digital inequalities, um, digital gender divide, so looking at how we kind of how we interact with technologies on a daily basis. And endometriosis has always been there, and I've always been part of social media forums. I remember my first Facebook group on endometriosis. And so I've managed to do all of this researchy thing and all these sort of adulthood milestones, which many of which I haven't ticked, uh, thanks to the endometriosis online community, right? Because all of you have always been super supportive. And I feel like there's the journey of me being a researcher and a professional, and then being the fragile, very fragile, sick person, where I was sort of hiding with it for many years. But then after my second surgery in Scotland, I had several infections, and I ended up in bed for a year. And that was during my PhD, sort of not in bed always, but I was very sick. And this is when I sort of became very desperate, and I thought to myself, I might just make art out of it. And it started, and Hystera started then, and Hystera is my artist name. And I've been doing it since then, and I've been blessed enough to be surrounded by people who, have been supporting me and made the Endoviolence Collective and Endoviolence framework or paradigm. I don't know what to call it actually happen. So I'm a researcher and an artist, and a disabled person in my very early 40s.
I have a direct question to the way you described the beginning of your career, because I'm actually not sure. So, was endometriosis a part of your research from the get-go, from when you decided that you want to be a researcher and stay in the academia? Or is it something that sort of just, as you said, you were working with digital spaces mainly, but then that because of personal reasons, life, personal interests, we can also say that it then became a part of your research?
Yeah, I think most of my career path has been sort of focused on community work. So, community work and storytelling. So, the participatory aspects of community work and social justice has always been around, and it's just been working with different groups. And I ended up going into academia because of the work that I was doing with the communities, which was also around participatory digital technologies. And a huge part of it was also always looking at the different social issues that are out there. And I would work on many different social issues that are out there, but not on my own, very own. And it wasn't until I sort of realized how hard it is for me to exist in this world, and it has been, that I realized that actually endometriosis needs to come to the front of my work. But I initially started with art. So I just started making lots of art, and it was never, I never had the courage to actually bring it into my research. And it was maybe recently, a few years ago, that I kind of connected that part of community participation, storytelling, and also research. And it's all thanks to the wonderful team that I have at Leeds University, where I have this freedom to experiment with all of these topics, and they are very, very connected.
Well, that's actually a really amazing thing that you got, as you say, got this freedom to connect both types of interest, your professional interest and your personal interest. That's kind of the ideal, right? To be able to do this. But just to give us a little bit of extra context, I'm interested in, could you share what the Include Plus project actually is? So your part in it, but also what is this project at the University of Leeds about?
It's a funded project for 5 years. We've been given a grant, and I work with Professor Helen Fornan and Rosie Wilkinson, who is an incredible coordinator of the entire network. But the idea of the network is to look at how people operate within digital society, and to what extent their digital inclusion or exclusion, kind of intersects with their everyday life and affects their chances to just be a human being and like participate in society. So the aim of the network is to kind of look at those different strands around how we engage with digital technologies. One of which is well-being as well. That's one of the key strands from our work. So we fund all sorts of projects, and we sort of experiment primarily with participatory methods in communities to understand how people experience digital lives, right? And very often it doesn't really refer to digital per se. It's more your everyday life, because it's so intertwined now that it's sort of like post-digital. And we are trying to look at it from different perspectives around your right to stay offline, your ability to process information, to be seen, to be visible and recognized and included online, which relates to endometriosis as well. So that part, that's the Include Plus network, and I work there as a research fellow, and I do a little bit of everything. And I would say that endo violence is like this project that it's funny because there's a story there as well. I remember it was the first week of my position at Leeds, where I was setting up the first ever endo violence exhibition in Berlin. And I remember being extremely guilty, because I was chatting to my boss. I was like, "Look, Helen, I'm setting up this exhibition. I cannot like be 9 to 5 available this week." And she was like, "Alicia, you're fine. This is who you are, and you are with the network because you are doing all these different things." So it was really interesting how she actually started that conversation. She was like, "Where's this guilt coming from? Is it capitalism?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I should be, everything." And so the network, my adventure with the network started when I was actually physically setting up the exhibition in Berlin.
That is actually a really interesting point that you raised, which I'm certain that a lot of people in the audience will be able to relate to as well, although it's not our main topic, but the guilt. And this actually comes up very often in conversation, but also in research, that guilt is one of the main feelings that comes with endometriosis, with all chronic illnesses, I would say. But since I researched endometriosis, I don't want to generalize into research that I have not done. But just based on the things that we know from psychology, it seems to be the truth of this guilt of whether you're being productive enough, whether you're um, you're constantly comparing yourself to able-bodied people, right? We have this intersection here with ableism that you also speak a lot about, and not just physical ableism, but also with neurodivergency, which I know that you are quite vocal about as well. So it's very interesting, you know, whatever line of work you do, even as researchers, like we have so much information, we research it, we know the data, but that doesn't mean that we can help ourselves. You know, we can't stop ourselves from feeling it anyway. So that's an interesting point to raise. And we're definitely going to talk about the concept of endoviolence. But just quickly before that, I want to focus on the digital aspect as well. I think that you're familiar with Eileen Holovka and her research, if I'm not mistaken. I think that you know her, and she was our guest 2 episodes ago. For those of you in the audience who weren't there, Eileen did really a landmark study on the ways in which people with endometriosis use social media. And it was very revealing in terms of how much we have come to depend on social media for medical information and for support. And obviously, then we can ask questions, well, why did this happen? Why don't we get support elsewhere? And I'm just wondering if you can come in a little bit on that from your perspective. So you talked about, you briefly now mentioned post-digitalism, which I think you're very correct. It's very hard to divide. I mean, our lives are half-half, right? It's very immersed. From your work in digital spaces and digital inequalities and just the way that the digital aspect of our lives work, what is sort of your impression or conclusion about the endo existence, let's call it that, in a digital space?
Oh, such a massive topic because it really depends on where you want to, which angle you want to take. Because I feel that what the study that you referred to has done is I think is incredible because it is also looking at the information science aspect of it and how we create information, how we collect information, how we make meaning out of the information that we see. And I think within that, there's so many different aspects in, being able to, first of all, access spaces that are safe, where you can learn more about endometriosis. And for me, increasingly over the years, it's been mainly, social media. I've been in and out of different types of social media, but I first remember there was this blogger from Australia, Melissa. I think she was like one of the first one that I followed. I had her cookbook, and I was like, I'm just gonna drink green juice and I'll fix myself. And I think it was the time where sort of this idea of an influencer, we started seeing more people who were becoming not just bloggers, but actually like lifestyle and health influencers. And so with that, we had this like new network of experts who are, in this position where they can monetize their expertise, but at the same time, they have to defend their existence. They have to deal with their own disabilities, and also with the society per se, like in general. And I think it's just, so you've got the experts, you've got the people who are, just getting information whenever they can, and that also, the way you access information, the way you participate in digital society is very much sort of linked to like a social status as well. So you need to have data, you need to have a device that you can privately use to check these maybe sometimes very sensitive topics. And if you don't have that, if you're a young girl and you need to share a tablet with your brother in some places, that's the case, then you have less of a meaningful digital existence, right? So you don't have access to that information. And so it's accessing information, filtering through it, choosing one for yourself, and then going through those waves of misinformation, disinformation, and trying to figure out how you relate to it, what kind of impact it has on your well-being. Because I had times where I also had to kind of stop looking at certain hashtags because they were so triggering and there was so much of it. And I feel like sometimes when there's too much of something, it also kind of like loses its meaning, right? Because you're so exposed to trauma endometriosis trauma that you just scroll through it. And the question that I ask in some of the little writings that I've done is about, is this visibility actually bringing us closer to any solutions? Or is it quite the opposite, because there has been one article that I wrote about girls who are invisibly disabled and they are posting things on social media, and then there's older men saying, perhaps, or not just older men, but people and newspapers saying, no, they're just like the snowflakes generation, and they're just trying to, they call them sickfluencers now, right? There's a term for that, where you are yeah, so there's all this I think there's so many angles and there's so many things we could talk about. And one of the things that I've been writing about recently is this introduction of online endometriosis appointments in the UK as a form of innovation, which to me is quite shocking, considering a non-existing gynecological sort of universal access in this country. It's very similar, it's very different to Europe, right? So you see, like, we could open up so many topics. You just need to like wave a little flag when you want me to stop, and then I will shut up. But I'm shutting up.
No need to shut up. You're always a pleasure to listen to. But yes, it is a very big topic, and that also reflects on how vast the space is actually that endometriosis now occupies in the online spaces. Although I sometimes do wonder if it is truly that big, or is it perhaps just because it's my focus? Is it my
Yeah.
algorithm and my bubble that now makes me feel like there is so much information out there? So that's for me personally. Always, I sometimes ask myself, like, is this really true? Is my impression correct? And it's a very interesting point that you raised about sickfluencers and the way that that can also backfire.
Mhm.
But I wonder with that, is that even avoidable? I don't really think that it is avoidable. I think that it just the same type of prejudice and misogyny that we always had kind of now moved into the digital space, right? Before sickfluencers, we had women offline before in the pre-internet world protesting or them talking about this before civil rights movements, even when we go back in, further down in history. I'm sure that we also had midwives 400, 500 years ago doing their own kind of protesting of trying to get people to pay attention that this is really awful and we need to plant more of this and that herb that will help women who have what we would now call endometriosis. And they were then also called their version of sickfluencers and hysterical and making things up. So, in a way, do you see this phenomenon as being, what, I mean, it is a little bit damaging, but what are your thoughts on that? Because I'm inclined to think that unfortunately, as long as we don't get rid of systemic misogyny, whatever we do is going to be stigmatized this way.
Yeah,
Would you agree
and
with that?
I think that's one of the things that I was sort of trying to compare it to as well, was like digital hysteria. That it is sort of seen like, oh my god, these and one of the things that I also talked about was that in research, when we often talk about girlhood and positive futures, we want to see girls that are smiling, maybe doing TikTok dances, so they give us hope about the future. And we talk about the Mother Earth and like the future generation. So girls are essentially like our little lens into the future, and we want it to be representable and sort of giving us hope, right? And the moment you see uh, uh, girls in hospitals with sad faces, I mean, it clashes with the vision that capitalism has for maybe girls and women. And the other side of it is actually, I think what worries me the most is the amount of digital and digitally based gender-based violence, right? The ways that you can be bullied and stalked are so they just people are just becoming more and more innovative, right? And how to target someone and how to destroy someone's entire existence. And that could be over a simple thing like talking about your period. And I think it's finding this way where you are able to protect yourself, but then again, you shouldn't be, because it's not you should not be told to become more digitally literate to protect yourself, because it puts you in an impossible situation. And I think maybe there is something as well about endometriosis. I think we are in this in this world where everything is so unpredictable, but and showing up online also is a huge risk, right? And I feel like we don't have there's no guidelines on how to do it. So and especially with the sickness, I think it's something that when you talked about guilt and shame, I feel like there is also this certain idea that if you do present yourself as a sick person online, you want to do it in a very specific way. So you are the sort of super crip, right? You want to create a narrative that is an inspirational one, right? You're not just a disabled person. You're a disabled person who's done this and that and this and that, and it's so these narratives about only showing certain sides of your disability to make people comfortable and hopeful. uh, I think I have that in me. I definitely internalized sort of ableism and the neuronormative idea of who I should be by now, perhaps. And I think, yeah, there's lots to, so that's why I feel like whatever the community is doing, it's hard work, it's um, so thank you everybody for doing your incredible work, because I struggle myself to spend too much time on Instagram, and I guess, yeah.
And that's where we kind of come in with unpaid labor, right? Where we look at why these spaces even came to be. Um, One of the drivers behind them is the need for information, right? The need for information, the need for recognition, for self-expression. But we often forget that when we look at content, that somebody had to create it, right? And it's not, it's still a labor. We have artists, we have people who are doing the work basically of marketing managers, of professional content creators, but who are unpaid in their work, and yet a lot of others lean on them for
Mm.
support. I know that I have seen and that I follow some really amazing Instagram profiles. Speaking of which, if anybody in the audience has like a favorite Instagram profile or sickfluencer, or if you are very active on social media, please feel free to share your contacts in the chat. But people who really are producing very quite amazing, frankly, work posts which explain the medicine, which explain the newest research, which really are in-depth information. This takes a lot of work, and we're just consuming it as and this person isn't being paid. And so, do you have any? Have you come across in your research? Um, when it comes to this community work, inequalities within a community work and the exasperation of community work, have you seen how this affects positively and negatively? And what exactly do you even mean? How would you define this when we say endometriosis community? We say it a lot, like I'm
Yeah.
part of the endo community, but what do I even mean when I say that?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. I think there's more than one. There is so many different endo communities by now, and I know there's been frictions between different type of people and arguments, and I mean it's absolutely normal for people to have different opinions. And as with feminism, it's not about finding a way to agree with one another all the time, but actually to live through the kind of accept the differences. Um, but I feel like I'm maybe not so much in within the community anymore. Uh, I'm somewhere in my little bubble of silly videos, or I've just my algorithm is watching me carefully. So in a situation of crisis, I'm getting the right content, So I get the therapy content that will explain why I'm feeling this way, or so I've trained it this way. But I would say that it is about, so my worry is that there is this element of, it is attention economy, right? And it operates of on us doing, yeah, free labor, because we are the CEOs of ourselves, right? And for us to create a community, I think, yeah, there's lots of labor that needs to be done. And yeah, what was the other part of the question, by the way? Because I'm going into a different direction, I think.
I don't even remember.
So there's the community aspect, and then there's the frictions and maybe the positive sides, right?
But I think that you've covered it. It was about labor, the
Yeah,
concept of free labor and the concept of community. Because you said that you even started your research by looking at community work. So
yeah.
is it fair to say that you recognize community work within endometriosis online spaces?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just to even think about the Endo Violence Collective, and none of the work would be possible without the founder Alison Rick, right? And she's been sort of behind the Instagram, uh, spending so much time there. And I think all of this labor and hours and sort of maybe being exposed to, like, I obviously I've not done it myself, but I can only imagine how difficult it is, and to what extent you're actually, when you are representing something like the End of Violence Collective, which is also, sort of an exercise, an experiment in us trying to create a collective which kind of operates within some different time zones and abilities. And I think it's really interesting that as an example to see how things can be amazing, but they can also go very, very wrong, right? Because you're not only you're operating within your body and your ability to think and perceive the world, which could be very different to someone else. And then you're using digital technologies to communicate about things. So wonderful things happened within the End of Violence Collective because people were willing to kind of get involved, and people like Alison were there to, serve as a buffer, I guess, to, when you are managing an account like this, I can only imagine how hard it is, because people would get in touch and share their personal stories. And then, how do you navigate that space? How do you also, like, protect yourself and preserve your story? So I think there is an element of that, a massive self-sacrifice and massive amount of unpaid labor, which to me kind of comes down to this. We talk a lot about care as a form of feminine labor, and how that often is also, like, happening online, right? That we are expected to be empowering, and also how women are also expected to create communities, right? That you need to be a part of a community. So I would say, because of the work that we've done, it's been very clear that we've also had, issues, because we're very different. And I think what I've learned through this experience is that there is a need for you to be an individual within the collective and within the community. So I think if you're a content creator, perhaps, um, I think there are those waves of content that go around, right? And it's about finding your way with the community, but also while preserving yourself and, like, your story and your well-being, but also the way you want to navigate that space. Or
That's very true. Yes. So remaining an individual within a community, caring for yourself while you're caring for others. And you are very correct in pointing that out, that this historically has somehow been defined as female labor, as if um people who are born biologically female are just born with this innate talent to be community leaders and organizers, and that's our mission in life. But that
and
would
I'm
open
not.
up
I'm not. I am useless when it comes. I have big ideas. I forget about things. My tabs are open, different patterns, but showing up in a like, I can work within the community, but I also realized in recent years that maybe I'm not the best community member, or because there are certain expectations from being a community and looking out for one another. And I think, uh, being part of a community also allows you to learn more about yourself and your limitations. I think that's
Well, of
something that
course, it's like with any work, right? Or like with any friendship or any relationship, that is what a community is in a way. But what I find interesting here is that we reflected on the amount of labor, that it's unpaid labor, the expectations, inner expectations, outer expectations. But what keeps bothering me in the whole story is the fact that it is so obvious, even if you don't look at research, if you're not a researcher,
yeah,
you're not going to go through a lot of data, but just observing on what happens in digital spaces, it becomes so incredibly clear that there is a very big need for community, for exchange, for this type of care work,
yeah,
but it's not institutionally offered, and it should be, right? In the end, we are not talking about a hobby, we are talking about an illness,
exactly.
which, as we all know, affects 1 in 10, 1 in 9 um, people born female on this planet. So this is a
Mm-hmm.
huge issue, right? We shouldn't be talking about this as if it's a crafts club. It's actually something very
Yeah,
important,
filling in the
which leads.
gaps, right? It's like it's actually when you think about it, what my problem with that is that you see some of it, so much of it, people doing all the research and like posting the information, and it sort of becomes normalized. You know what I mean? That you're gonna fall back on your community, and perhaps yeah, it works this way, so let's add more digital technology at it, right?
Exactly. And just from my experience, and I'm not sure if your experience is the same, that
Yeah.
also carries on to people who do it professionally as researchers. I personally know I've said this a couple of times already. In all of my years of networking and working, I have met exactly 3 people who are working in the field of endometriosis who do not themselves have endometriosis. So this carries on even further, that I always jokingly like to say I should have never done a PhD. Like my illness forced me to do a PhD, because at one point I just threw everything on the desk and said, okay, no one's gonna do it. Fine, I'm gonna do
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Which
yeah, yeah.
wasn't even the plan. So this really so I've spoken to so many people who completely have the exact, like, I wish I was a weird story, but I'm actually not. This happens so very often, which leads me directly to the concept of endoviolence. I'm just being mindful of the time, and I really want us to get a little bit into the nitty-gritty of the academic side as well. In the chat, I put the link to the endoviolence collective website, so that for those who might not, and for those watching on YouTube, this is all in the description of the video. So for those who might not be that familiar with the work, so it is a collective of researchers and artists. There's a social media presence, and you can find on this website a lot of work that has been done, including a brilliant, available for free book about the concept of endoviolence. And as Alicia points out, it was collective labor, but it is a fact that you, as an academic, coined this term in this, let's call it, academic framework. And when I first read about your definition that you wrote about endoviolence, I was uh, impressed, might not even be the correct word. I felt like, oh, finally, because I felt it was a word that I was missing. And I wasn't even
Mhm.
aware that I was missing it so much. Like, this one term encompassed so much of what I often wanted to say, and I could turn one whole paragraph into just saying endoviolence.
Wow, okay.
So I think it is an incredibly useful term, and I really hope that it catches on and starts being used in research. For those who have not stalked you the way that I have and read all this stuff, how would you define endoviolence as a term to be used in what is it? What do you mean when you say endoviolence?
I haven't looked at the term itself in a while because I had to recover from uh, from the process of co-creation of it, right? So I would say that to be able to coin the term or co-create it, you have to endure endoviolence yourself because you have to go through those systems that are um, oppressive and systems that don't talk to one another often. And so the idea of endoviolence is to see endometriosis and our experiences of being in the world perceived by others, treated by others or not, as a web of interactions that isn't just about one thing. The term violence talks about, the in kind of looks at the way endometriosis has been perceived by society and medical field over the centuries and where we got now. And for it to be seen as a systemic issue, not just, looking at it from a medical perspective, which is incredibly important and it is the most important one, but actually realizing that when you live in a body that might have endometriosis, you will go through your life dealing with so many different issues that are not just endometriosis itself, but it's the issues that surround your ability to exist in the world. And these often include poverty, lack of, you cannot consistently stay in education because you are bleeding through lessons. Perhaps I had that. And so it's also looking at the different types of violences within endoviolence, which is not being seen as a full person with agency and understanding of one's body. It's the systemic violence related to epistemic injustice, which means, constantly telling you that your pain is not real, or if it is real, then you should deal with it. So you live in this limbo where it's either or. It's how endometriosis affects your relationship, your relationship with your colleagues, with your family. How many times have you been maybe disbelieved by someone? What if your partner isn't happy with you because you cannot have sex with him because you're in pain? What if your coworkers are judging you because, well, you were fine yesterday and you're not today? So is that even real? So I would say, I can't even remember all the topography of the different violence. I feel like it's been so violent for me to co-create it, that I sort of like forgot about it entirely, But it is that an idea. I would like to see it as a web, as a map, where you could potentially see how all these different elements have impact on your life. So imagine going to a therapist and they'll be like, oh, so have you experienced, someone disbelieving you, or were you not granted health benefits because you look too healthy or you're too young? Then was someone abusive towards you online because you talked about them? So it's all these different patterns, and I don't think what there is in the book that this is all there is, and this is how we should think about endo violence, because I feel like it's like an open framework, a community owned tool, maybe like a compass to see and to make a case for a more just and coherent approach to endometriosis that kind of considers the social, economic, well-being part of it, right? Because it isn't, your nervous system is constantly exposed to these systems where you're either have been invisible for centuries, or you've been told that it's all your fault. And so then you feel guilty and you feel shame, and then it's like it's this constant anticipation for more violence, right? You are and then there's instances of self-violence as well, where you are self-harm because of the inability to deal with the violence system. So I think there's lots of layers, and it's sort of linked to patriarchy, capitalism, racism. There's really the idea of how we look after our bodies, or how we consider them to be useful to the system. That in itself is very oppressive, and we live with those ideas in our heads, and we have no choice very often but to power through. So
Yes, and I like that you use the word map, because it is exactly how I saw it, that you sort of mapped out all of the factors that come are actually in play here, because it is not just the physical disease itself that is violence on the body, but as you said, we have to exist in the world. So the term really summarizes all of these factors, social factors, education, ability to work, ability to make money, which is tied to the ability to be independent. Then we have different levels of physical ability, mental health, which can stem just from your inner anxiety. Just that word of the use, just, it's not just anxiety. Anxiety is a very big issue, but also which can stem from being abused outside of yourself, right? Abused by doctors, abused by peers. We could go on and on and on, but you created this really wonderful map, and I do encourage people to take a look at this book, which is made available for free in PDF at the link that I showed you. But it would be very appreciated for everyone who is able to do a pay what you can kind of donation, because there were a lot of people working on this truly a brilliant book. And as a
including
myself,
yourself. Including yourself, you were part of
I
the
did
people
very
reviewing
minimal
it.
work. It's not about me today. It's about you.
Yes, but I really want to make it very clear that I was only able to do it because of the collective, because Alison has done the incredible editing, and in fact, I was like, do you know what? This is too much for me. I'm just going to turn it into a website. And Alison was, no, no, no. This is going to be a book because this is important. So I would say that probably her role and the role of the community, like I really don't think I would ever finish it. I don't think it's finished. It's like the basis. One thing that came to my mind, like we were saying, it is about that map, right? And if even within research, if we think, okay, how about if we take a few elements of the endoviolence and connect them together in our research to map our existence within the local context, right? So if I think about someone living around the corner, how do they better understand, have a better picture of their entire life and the system that they're in? Because those systems are very different to where I am, just like I'm in the UK right now, where there's no access to gynecological care, where many people go abroad to get their surgeries. So and as a migrant, all of this, is important. So I just wanted to say huge thank you to everybody for making it happen, the book. And I am working on like a page sitting there where you can chat with the book, but it's just all work in progress. And one
Oh,
day
that sounds very interesting. That could be
that would
something
be
really
lovely.
interesting.
Yeah.
But yes, and thank you. Also, it speaks a lot. It says a lot about you that you're really always very not just mindful, but with a very big heart, giving everybody credit. So that is something to aspire to.
I do forget
But
sometimes, you know that, right? I do. Sometimes my brain goes, oh, I should be. Yeah. So I also forget. So I'm sorry for whoever I've offended today.
But I think that I would like to kind of open up a little bit into the chat for whoever feels comfortable on tuning in. Because there is a thing that you said, which I find interesting and very relatable, when by the end you mentioned the violence that we commit on ourselves, and actually the ironically the violence of doing this kind of work.
Oh, yeah.
And I believe I don't know everybody who is currently in our audience, but I know that a couple of people present are working in research or in the arts on the topic of endometriosis. And I'm wondering if others also experience this, because I, for example, I'll open the floor by giving you my example so that you know what I mean, sort of what kind of input I'm hoping to hear from you. When I was finishing, like near the end of writing my dissertation this summer, and I think that most of you can relate, that's really the last push, and you're so tired and you're just over it. And at one point, I really felt, what have I done to myself? So I am suffering physically every day with this illness. It's really kicking my butt. I am writing about it constantly. And not only that, but I am reading all this research. And let's face it, research around endometriosis is overwhelmingly negative. So I'm trying to, keep myself alive and keep myself hopeful. But every single day I'm reading texts about how there is no cure and how there is no funding and how everything
You
is
traumatize
misunderstood.
yourself. Yeah.
It's misogyny, sexism, and then you're just like, everything is awful and I'm gonna die. When this is like 24/7 just this content. Obviously, I got over it and I'm very happy that I wrote my dissertation. I love it. I love my research, but there are moments of just being surrounded by so much negativity simply because the research is negative. That's why we're doing it. We want to improve things, right?
Mm.
So I'm wondering if anybody else would like to maybe chime in with their own personal experience of kind of regulating themselves emotionally and mentally with or through this type of work that we do.
First of all, I just want to thank you so much, Alicia and Alex, for holding this space. And I want to acknowledge the labor that you all are doing, that right now you are doing unpaid labor. And thank you so much for thinking through ways for us to join together around the world. Just want to acknowledge how amazing you both are and how amazing it is to see both of you. And I see some little hearts showing up. Um, and, I think you both have done such an amazing job of talking about the conflict between living in a disabled body and then working in digital spaces like Alicia has really, Alicia, you deserve so much credit. You have absolutely broken ground for all of us to be able to name what so many of us experience. And Alex, your research has also, in so many ways, broken ground for so many of us. So I think as much as we can focus on the violence that we experience in this work, for me, when I think about it, I think about like the hope that we are cultivating interglobally and the ways that that's creating visibility. A really great example is in England, where Alicia is currently based. I hope that's okay to say. Georgie, who created the film This Is Endo, just won national recognition at what we call in the US like something equivalent to the Oscars. And even though there was a lot of violence in the process of that creation, the outcome of it is more people having the skills to engage and to support us. And Alex, to your point about only meeting 3 researchers or 3 people that don't have endo that are interested in it, I think that the work that you're both doing is absolutely laying the groundwork for us to be able to explore how to do this all with less violence. And that being said, something that we have practiced within the Endo Violence Collective, all of us, is experimentation, because there isn't a roadmap for what it looks like when we inflict violence on ourselves by pushing past what our bodies are physically capable of and the confines of what we're physically capable of and what expectations we have professionally. So I just want to hold space for how loving of a conversation this is, and thank you so much to Alex for making this possible.
Thank you so much, Alison, for your kind words and also for all the work that you do. And I see also that we have a comment in the chat. I am afraid of mispronouncing the name Itzel, I think. I'm so sorry if I'm not pronouncing it correctly. Says, thank you for your work. I come from Mexico and currently I'm working on philosophical and qualitative research around endoaffectivity. Sounds very amazing. Hopefully, we can create bridges between countries beyond the global north. I am very hopeful of that as well. What is unfortunate about endometriosis, but maybe fortunate for our research efforts, is that it seems to really not know boundaries, that kind of whatever system that you live in, it's, if you'll excuse me for using colloquial terms, it's kicking your ass in the same way. So the work that needs to be done.
National form of oppression, so we can.
Yes. So the forms of oppression, of course, are nuanced depending on the country that you live in, the culture that you live in. But a lot of it, unfortunately, is almost the same. I have read so much research that really shook me. I think that was kind of the beginning of my own research journey when I read there were interviews done with over 1,000 women from different countries and even different continents, and the stories were so similar. The stories of gaslighting and the way that they experienced their symptoms and the way that what sort of healthcare experience they had. And not only were they similar to one another, they were similar to mine. And that was the moment when I decided I really want to do this research, because my my reaction was just WTF, like how is this, why is this happening? So definitely I think we also need a lot of intercontinental and intercultural research. Just a tiny shout out here. I'm not sure, Itzel, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. If you already know about the SEEN network, if you don't, I would love to invite you to join. It's the Social Sciences in Endometriosis Research Network. And actually, you can feel free to email me about it. But next week on Wednesday, Annelies Wekkeser, who is the founder of this network, will be doing a talk. And she will be telling us all about her work, but also about the work of the network, where researchers of all levels are welcome. And for me and for my work, it was a very important network, helping me out in times of crisis when I didn't know what to do or where to go on, and maybe professors in my surroundings weren't able to help, but the other experts and the other researchers really were. So I would like to invite you to join us for that as well.
And it's I'd love to be able to learn more about your work as well. If there's any way like we can help from, just use each other's brains to kind of plot a little revolution, anti-violence revolution, then feel free to get in touch as well.
Hi, can you listen to me?
Yes, go on.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm currently at work, so it's kind of weird. And now I'm speaking in English because I am in Mexico, but anyways. But yeah, I come from a master in philosophy of science. I'm currently also applying for a PhD at the University of Vienna and also at the University of Utrecht, because I would like to do this kind of bridge between these systems of health from Europe and also the ones that are stratified here in Latin America, and to do a comparison research on how activists with endometriosis cope with these differential types of welfare health systems. And yeah, like for my master thesis, what I did was to study the affective entanglements in the case of endo patients. Of course, it was much more on a philosophy of science background, not necessarily an applied one. However, it was really interesting to see just what you said, Alekszandra, like all of these similarities between communities, even though we were from, or we are from, different geographies. Sadly now, my research is only in Spanish, but hopefully it's gonna be also in English. I'm currently also working on a manuscript, and just like you guys, I also live with endometriosis, and also it's really, really interesting and difficult to see the high loads of oppressions that come in geographies like this one, because here it's kind of like a double work where you have to also become a professor of biomedical professionals, because many of them don't even know about endometriosis, or it's like the first time they ever encounter with a patient like us. But yeah, and thank you very much for your email. I'm gonna reach you for sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much for chiming in, and your research really sounds very interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing it develop, and I wish you the best of luck with that. But I'm also being very mindful of the time. It's been over an hour. I hope that it's been fun for you. For me, the time flew by. But I would like to for us to very briefly wrap up this session and hopefully continue being in touch and chatting about all of this outside of the series. But as my final question, this is also like a little bit of a tradition that I'm doing with these series. To kind of come back to the whole point of the series, I would like to ask you, Alicja, in your opinion, this is a big question, so just off the top of your head.
Just a simple answer, okay.
No pressure. What is your either your hope for it or really your belief that what can non-medical research do for endometriosis? So why is non-medical research important for medical topics?
Because health is related to social injustice, your health outcomes are very much linked to any other social indicators of your existence. And one thing that I would say, Itzel, you made me think about, actually, when we look at when we talk about the epidemics of violence against, gender-based violence, I think having those conversations of what are the strategies to oppose to gender-based violence, I think that could also help us to see how, from our different perspectives, we could maybe have a bit of a solidarity or organize somehow to resist to endo violence. But that doesn't mean resist to medical field. Okay, it's about finding ways to have these conversations. And I think the medical research, I think we could support one another and not like what's the word? Cancel each other? Yeah, I wouldn't cancel anybody. That's what I'm saying. But I think just having that awareness, yeah, that's health is a social justice issue.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I think that you really hit the gist of it, that this should be something complementary, right? And not something against one another, but really complementary, because we are not just bodies on the table. We are human beings, and we have to observe not an ill body, but an ill person. And here's to hoping that very soon in the future, non-medical research about illness is no longer what are those people doing kind of thing, but something accepted, regarded, and valued. And people like you, Alicia, are definitely helping us reach that goal.
So we belong then. Is that what you're saying? We belong to the new field. That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your thoughts and your research. And thank you to everybody who was with us in the chat. And thank you for your input. And also thank you to everyone who is watching this at a later date at home. It was a real pleasure spending this evening with you, and I hope to see you again next time. Same place, same time on Wednesday.